Hey guys! So, in the absence of a Socratic seminar, and with Alex putting so much effort into his 20-minute long video, I figured I'd better do a video response of my own, kind of respond to... First, I guess I'm just going to respond to all of Alex's discussion questions, and then a couple other things in his response that I took note on, and then I guess I'll just give a little rundown about my feelings of the novel. So the first question Alex left us with was, which title is better? The original French, which roughly translates to the extension of the domain of struggle, or our English title, whatever. And I guess I'd have to say it's the French title for sure. I think one of the centerpieces of this novel, as far as its philosophy goes, is when this phrase comes up in the novel, and the exact quote is, "Economic liberalism is an extension of the domain of struggle, its extension to all ages and all classes of society." And he goes on to say the same about sexual liberalism. So I think if the novel has any theses, one of the major ones would be that as we're given fewer established rules, more choices, more freedom in things like economics and sex, then that'll lead to more struggle, more instances where the strong get stronger and the weak kind of get left behind. And when I look at the way our narrator is approaching this, I get more the sense that he's approaching it from an outsider's perspective looking in. I never really get the sense that he looks upon himself as a part of the struggle. Like, he's definitely contextualizing his place in it. Like when he tells us how, he's got real good career prospects, and at the same time he says things like how he's always been a last resort for women he's been with. So he knows where he stands in the grand scheme of things, but he's not a narrator I can really picture or describe as struggling, so to speak. And I feel like, well, I don't feel like it. It's clear that indifference is really the defining characteristic of our narrator. And another, you could say, thesis of the book would be that it's an indifference that's brought on by, changes in technology, increased globalization, and things like you've been talking about, Alex, with the sexual revolution and whatnot, changing social hierarchies around, and all of these processes are leading to indifference. So in that sense, I can understand why whatever is chosen as the English title. I think it's kind of interesting how the French title and the English title both kind of refer to one specific philosophy espoused by the book, or they each refer to their own whatever, referring to the indifference, the detachment, the alienation, etc., and the domain of struggle, with that whole liberalism, blah blah blah, leads to, being referred to by the French one, and they don't really call to each other. But I'd almost say that our narrator, were he writing the book, I'm sure he would stick with the name, the extension of the domain of struggle, but whatever's a pretty apt title for a book about our narrator. But yeah, I think in general the French title is a lot more evocative, so I prefer that one. And Alex's second question, how prophetic is this book? I had completely forgotten when it was written once I started reading it, I guess, because I had been assuming mid-2000s the entire time, and I didn't realize until you said it that it was 94, so yeah, I'd say it could be written nowadays, and I wouldn't think anything would seem out of date or anything. And I feel like, yeah, it's prophetic in the way it showed a shifting in society's worldview towards like a more defeatist, why bother type attitude, a whatever type attitude. And I imagine that's what you mean when you keep saying doomer, but I've never heard that word before, so whatever. Another question we got here. How would this book be different if written today? So, I would be very interested in seeing our narrator's take on all the social politic bullshit that dominates headlines these days. And I definitely think you're right when you say it would be a lot more bitter. I think he'd find a lot more to hate about our world today. Another question, is our protagonist seeking or rejecting society's embrace? I really can't see any instances of him seeking it. I think his outlook on society really just ranges from indifference to disgust. And I think he takes a little bit of pride in setting himself up to be an outsider like that. If he can find pride in anything, really, because indifference is really what defines him in pretty much everything. I think maybe you could rationalize himself, hospitalizing himself as an attempt to get back into society, to rationalize to himself that he is a part of society and he can't completely set himself alone. But in general, I really don't see him making any effort to connect with anyone, gain anyone's respect or admiration, or just be a part of society in any way, in any meaningful way. And the last question you left us with, is our protagonist incel? Well, I think like so many other facets of this book, our protagonist, he's indifferent. Like, I don't see much evidence that he's really looking for sex. Like, he states pretty straightforwardly and soberly that it's been 2 years since I've been with a woman, and I'm not getting the sense that this bothers him, so I'm not sure. I don't care about incels, I really don't, but I don't know, would you consider him an incel when he's kind of explicitly set up next to Tesseron, who certainly is an incel? I don't know. I just think he's too indifferent to even care if he's an incel or not. So, that's all your questions, huh? Alright, there are a couple other things that I wrote down here that you mentioned that I kind of wanted to touch on. So you mentioned that one line where he says human relationships become progressively impossible, and this reduces the quantity of anecdotes that make up life. And I guess I would just say I don't really buy that. I would say that going out and forming human relationships is a choice, and it involves some level of self-actualization. I don't think you can blame technology or society for your lack of effort to connect with people. And sure, there are plenty of people who just have trouble with this. I think we can all understand that. But like Rush said, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And I think a lot of us make these choices for convenience, but I don't think you can reduce that to human relationships are an impossibility when it's really more of a lack of effort. And again, I think this goes back to that defeatist, doomer, as you would say, at mentality. And on the opposite side, I think a lot of people would probably make the argument that human relationships are more easy or easier to maintain with social media and technology and whatnot. Maybe more superficial, but I guess this novel, 94, wasn't really at that point yet, but worth mentioning maybe. And I do like that idea at the end of it, or just the way of thinking when he says it reduces the quantity of anecdotes that make up life. I just think it's a funny way of looking at things. Now, what else did you say? I mean, I don't care to go too much into it, but you went into the whole can women be incels thing, and I think, at the very least, I think our protagonist thinks so, with his portrayal of Catherine there. And then there's the part in part 2 where he's talking about there's that woman or girl he went to school with who's just fat and ugly, no one talks to her, and no one ever will, what happens when she goes home and all that. I think he's at least acknowledging that women can face the same situations in the right circumstances. And then another thing I was immediately drawn to, as you were, was when he said the novel form is not conceived for depicting indifference or nothingness, which I just really don't understand the inclusion of that there. I think there's a long history of the novel, going into themes of alienation and detachment, and I think it works just fine as a form for that. A lot of my favorite novels do the same thing, and it just feels kind of out of place because it's not like he's establishing a new form in conjunction with saying that. So, okay, guy. Alright, so I guess that's really all I wanted to say. I guess the one thing I'd say on my own is, I don't know if you find this a good reference point or not, but since it's French and since it deals with themes of alienation and detachment and all that, I think it's a convenient reference to make, but I was thinking of The Stranger pretty much the entire time I was reading this, and it's even pretty similar structurally, with the whole beginning is kind of established, just his personality, how he's so detached from people around him, how he's so indifferent, and then he kind of gets manic towards the end, and yeah. But the way I was kind of looking at this novel was our protagonist, I kind of saw him as a version of Meursault, who's no longer so much the exception of the rule, Meursault who is kind of the everyman instead of the stranger now. Or if not quite yet the everyman, at least showing a progression towards that becoming the norm, where we're a society of strangers. And I think this goes back to another thing you said when you were asking about him using the pronoun you and who he was addressing by saying that. But the way I was reading it was almost as if he was setting himself up as kind of a speaker for this whole class of modern man who's feeling these same feelings of disgust and alienation and indifference. But yeah. As for my feelings on the book, I really can't say I enjoyed it as much as you did. I just feel like he's piggybacking on a whole long line of novels that go into these similar themes, and it's more contemporary, but I don't see that he's really bringing much new to the table. You love it for its how you can relate it to incel culture. I don't know, I am not really interested in looking at it that way, but like novels about alienation are just, in general, they tend to be some of my favorites. We're talking The Stranger again, Notes from Underground, Damien, No Longer Human, all your Russian stuff like your Gogols and your Turgenevs, and I know you love this stuff too, but I don't know, I just don't find, what's his name, Hulbeck? I don't even know how you pronounce that. I just don't find him as psychologically compelling as those authors who are a lot of my favorites. And in general, I just thought the book seemed a little pointless and unexciting. And I know that's kind of the point, but I don't know. I just needed a little more from it. I was hoping for a little more debauchery. And it wasn't bad, but it didn't tickle my fancy too much. But I'm glad you picked it. Glad I read it. And I know I'm not as good as at making well thought out responses as you are, clearly, but hope I did alright, and looking forward to hearing from everyone else too.